Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm your host, Jordan Euclid, and today I'm joined by my friend Joshua Cameron. Joshua and I start the conversation discussing Joshua's deployments to Kosovo, Kuwait, and Iraq, and how his views on American foreign policy developed following his enlistment and his understanding of the political machinations behind the Iraq War. Next, Joshua explains how he discovered his spiritual path after returning from the war, which led to his political activism, including working with the Bernie Sanders campaign. We then discuss Joshua's experience tripping on psychedelics at the Devil's Tower and how he came to explore his greatest idea of goodness. We next discuss the Jungian archetypes of the mature masculine, why Joshua and I resonate with the magician archetype, and why Joshua has found inspiration in the character of Gandalf. We next consider the difference in boy versus man psychology and that life is about experience. Joshua then explains the Ching method and its relation to the book of Chinese mysticism, the Tao Te Ching. From there, we discuss balancing political awareness with not being infected by the toxicity spewed by the media. We end the conversation on challenging dogma, daily rituals, and the importance of being king of your own domain. This outro is titled King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Outro is available for this and all episodes available at entangledpodcast.substack.com. Music from the show available on the Spotify playlist Entangled the Vibes. Please enjoy. So hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of Entangled. I'm your host Jordan Euclid, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Mr. Joshua Cameron. Joshua, how are you today, sir?
Oh man, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. I'm really excited to talk to you today about the Ching method and all of your history. I think it's been a really interesting journey that you've been on. So to kick it off, would love if you would tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your history.
Sure, man. Appreciate the opportunity, and I currently live in Utah, born and raised here. What really kind of helped me with reference points to be able to get to my Ching method, be able to actually help me heal, actually took a lot of trauma, a lot of childhood abuse, a lot of alcoholism in the family, and that's both my dad's side and my mom's side, and being able to deal with that. At first, I lived life as a victim for a real long time. Oh, life happens to me. Oh, poor me. You know what? I'd also be successful if I didn't have X, Y, and Z happen to me. And it's so easy to fall into that. And what is so ironic is that living here in Utah, even though I was raised very secular, a big thing that a lot of the LDS, they talk about is this idea that their soul is up in heaven, like looking down saying, hey, that's who I'm going to be a part of. I'm going to be part of that family. I'm going to be born into that because they are going to be able to teach me the lessons that I need to learn. And come to find out, while nobody knows the truth of the capital T, well, from my model of the world that I have adopted now, I choose to believe that because I can see no better way of having a more empowering psychology than to say, you know what, I had hard things happen to me. Why? Because I was ready for them and because they taught me what I needed to learn.
Yeah. And it gets into the idea of your dark night of the soul. And, while you're going through those really challenging, terrible moments, that's when you grow. That's when you're forced to learn and to change and to, explore those deeper realities of who you truly are.
Oh, 100%. And then on top of that, Carl Jung was known for this idea that the lower the hell, the higher the heaven. And almost as if, as you're going into hell, you're being this rubber band stretched further and further and further. But the more you stretch a rubber band, let's say in this case, this rubber band is not going to snap. But the more that you stretch it, well, what happens once you release it? Well, the further and faster it goes. And so the deeper the hell can be, one can maybe take solace in the idea that when you find your path, where you find that flow to, whether you want to call it divinity or whether you want to call it God or, whatever, you'll find that you can rapidly and, with more acceleration, actually reach those higher levels where life actually happens for you instead of life happening to you.
Totally. Yep. And I think as you talk about the LDS idea of, you pick kind of where you incarnate, that's something that really resonates with me as well. That we have karmic debts that roll forward and we come here for an experience because there are both good and bad, or, if you want to label them that that your soul is meant to experience as part of your journey, as part of that evolution to a higher state of consciousness. So it's all about, I think, just reframing those challenges when you do face them.
Oh yeah, and those challenges can come in many forms. For instance, when I was 19, I joined the army, and I was. If you know much about the archetypes, Jungian archetypes, I'm very much a magician, and I really like Rory Kilmartin, which I don't know a lot of people who have necessarily heard of him, but he goes into the survival archetypes, and the survival archetypes are the immature versions, and so he names them animals because we become much more, primitive when we fall on our primitive archetypes. And so the sovereign would be the gorilla, the warrior would be the wolf, the magician would be the fox, and the lover would be the sheep. And as a magician, I did not and do not still like to be told what to do. Like, matter of fact, right, just how it is. I just immediately feel this resistance building up. Right, it's much nicer to be invited into the agreement, invited into the awareness or into the idea. And yet I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had so many people around me in my world saying, "Hey, Josh, what are you going to do? Hey, Josh, what are you going to do? Hey, Josh, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do when you grow up?" Ah! And my brother was in the army as a warrant officer. His wife at the time was in the army, going to the Defensive Language Institute at Monterey, California. I took a brief bit of time away from Utah to go live with them in Fort Ord, near Seaside, California. And, I was there for about 6 months. I joined the army because, hey, what am I going to do when I grow up, right? Well, here I am trying to put on my big boy britches, and made life a lot harder for me because, again, I had a hard time, dealing with being told what to do. So, I mean, what better than a totalitarian environment, right? But then, 2 years later, September 11th happened, right? I got orders in March of 2001 saying, "Hey, guess what? You're going to Kosovo." And everyone's like, "Yes, Kosovo. The war's over. It's a humanitarian mission. This is going to be amazing." And then 8 days before we deployed, September 11th happened. And yeah, man, that was rough. And what's probably the hardest part of, and maybe the most traumatic of any of my experiences in the military, even though I've dealt with people, death, dealt with, missing limbs, dealt with, with mangled limbs, all sorts of gross physical, but leading up to that experience, leading up to the 8 days of before we actually deployed to Kosovo, since all of our equipment was being shipped overseas, we had everything prepared. We had nothing but time to sit on our hands. Well, the powers that be thought it'd be a great idea to turn on the radio and have that radio on CNN on repeat constantly, and no way to escape it. And so effectively just pumped in my brain, well, Muslims attacked us, you better hate Muslims, but don't actually hate Muslims, but really you should hate Muslims. And so that was really weird for me because, Kosovo is a Muslim nation, right? Mainly Albanians that live there. So it really threw me in an existential crisis of, well, am I supposed to hate all these people I've never met, right? These victims of war, these victims of genocide, of ethnic cleansing. I'm just supposed to hate them because somebody in a country like far away from them. And so again, this really started building the groundwork for me to later on start manifesting much more into a spiritual path.
Yeah. Was that challenging being in the military at that time where, you're facing these kind of existential questions? And I imagine, in a culture where you're very much in a dialectic of us versus them, and you're like, that doesn't really feel right to me.
Well, it's incredibly challenging because you're not, you're supposed to, in the military, especially as a lower enlisted, you're much more expected to be much like a child, right? You're there to be seen and not heard. And if you have these ideas, well, shut up, Cameron. Nobody cares about those, Cameron. Shut your mouth. Keep your opinions to yourself. And it's incredibly difficult because then it's really what led me to join the army in the first place. Is that I had all these ideas of, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Hey, man, I want to do this. I want to be a marine biologist. And like, you're gonna be a marine biologist. They don't make any money. That's stupid. Why'd you do that? Right? You should do what I think you should do. So then again, it's just another reinforcement of, oh, the ideas that I have are stupid. I must be someone, who's unworthy. So I must have to keep my head down. And so then how do I balance that with keeping my head down, feeling stupid, being told I'm stupid, but then also understanding inside, like, hey, hating an entire, like, religion, right? Or a way of being or a way of looking at the world is ludicrous.
Yeah. So tell me about, what happened after 9/11. Like, did you move on from Kosovo to a war zone?
Yes, so Kosovo was a war zone. It wasn't an active one, but at the time, effectively there were accords that were written saying that all of NATO troops had to be housed in Kosovo, as I understand. And so we were in Camp Bondsteel, Kosovo. I did spend some time in Macedonia as well on that deployment, and then we came back. But so I was there. We deployed September of 2001, came back in April. But halfway through that deployment, right, our rear detachment who stayed behind, well, they deployed to Uzbekistan because, hey, all hands on deck. And we were stationed at Fort Campbell. I mean, home of the Screaming Eagles, 101st. If you ever seen Band of Brothers, that this is the Screaming Eagles. It was Easy Company back then, but now the phonetic alphabet is Echo. But then by January, we were, January of '03. So I came back from Kosovo in April of 2002, where rear detachment, I think, came back in July of 2002. And by January, we are already deploying again. And we deployed to Kuwait because even though war wasn't actually officially declared until I believe it was March of 2003, that we already knew that we were going to declare war. We already knew that, that the writing was on the wall.
Yeah. And so then did you go into Iraq?
I did. In fact, we were, as far as I understand, we were the very first combat sport hospital to actually jump forward into Iraq to support the war effort. And scary thing about that is the path that we took, going through what is, the common nomenclature was Beggar's Alley. I've never seen poverty like that in my life, man. Never, ever. I mean, we're driving through and it looks like Flintstone houses. There's no electricity. I don't know where they get their water. People barefoot on the asphalt that you would think would melt their feet from as hot as it is. And we're throwing MREs out the windows, throwing bottles. And kind of funny story, but made me feel bad is I threw this. I mean, because we had liter and a half bottles of water, so these big old things. And I threw one out the window, and I'm watching the rear view mirror bouncing and bouncing. And there's this little kid going to catch it, and poof, it hits him, and he falls back on his butt. But then I see him like stand up, like holding it in there. It's like, oh, thank you. But yeah, we jumped forward into Nasiriyah, Iraq, which was Talil Air Base, or known as LSA Adder. And that was strange because we found out a week later, after jumping forward, that the day prior, a maintenance company was actually captured by the Iraqi army and taken, POW. It's like, holy crap. So this wasn't even a well, managed, well secured route. And we went forward because, well, I mean, military is very political, and our full bird colonel really was after his 1-star general. And then hey, all right, this whole war effort was based off of bupkis, right? A big lie, which is like, oh, well, that's pretty much every American war, which is incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah. And when did you come to that perspective that it was all based on a lie?
So it was slowly, like, as soon as war was declared, they said Operation Iraqi Liberation. And it was like, wait a minute, what? That's a little on the nose, don't you think? And then it was a week later, then it was Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so that was really strange. And there was a lot of fear going on, depending on who, what unit you were in. For instance, here we are in a hospital, and you'll see less than half a kilometer away, you'll see other units set up from completely different areas, and we're getting all these warnings that there's incoming chemical attacks, and so we're getting all dressed up in our MOP 4 gear, right? Mission oriented protective posture. So we're wearing all of our charcoal gear, or putting on our gas mask, and people are looking at us like we're morons. Like, what are you guys doing? And yeah, so that was really strange. So it's like, okay, so these guys don't even know what's going on. And then I think I want to say it was less than 6 months that it actually came out that weapons of mass destruction was complete BS.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, do you think that's consistent with other enlisted servicemen and women, like where there's a general feeling that, we shouldn't have been there? Or do you think there's a bit of a split still? And do you still keep in touch with the folks that you're enlisted with?
Oh man, such a great question. So I don't keep in touch with very many people that I enlisted with. From what I've seen, there's not a lot of room for critique. And it's like, hey, we're America. We're supposed to be there. We're the world's police because, somebody's got to do it, and good for us. And there's not really people being like, hey, well, you know what? the war in Vietnam was based on the Gulf of Tonkin, which was a lie. Okay, well that's strange, right? The first war in Iraq was for oil. Second war in Iraq was also for oil, but then they said, well, it's not for oil, it's for oif, and then weapons of mass destruction, which didn't actually turn out. And then even now, man, I mean, look at what's going on with and I don't want to necessarily get you in trouble, but with Ukraine, right? For 2016, it was like, that orange man is bad because he likes Russia. And then, but he's so bad in existential crisis. And yet now we're potentially having a PP measuring contest with the two countries with 92% of the nuclear arms. Like, come on, guys. And so
It's insane.
yeah, it is insane. And again, that's where it kind of goes to support that. I don't think that there's a lot of room for critique. It's just people just take their marching orders and they move on. And, as sad as it is, life really is not much different than that movie Team America by Trey Parker and Matt Stone. I don't know if you ever watched that.
Oh yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's very accurate. No, and hey, don't worry about getting me in trouble. This is a place for free speech. And one question I want to ask is, you talk about some of the lies, and this is not a topic you want to go down, fully understand, but I'm curious, have your perspectives on 9/11 changed at all since being in the military?
Oh, 100%, man. Because, while I totally didn't buy into that I should hate all Muslims, I still bought into, well, hey, we were totally attacked. And yet every time that we start looking at these wars where we get pulled in to make the military industrial complex money, something that Eisenhower warned us about, right? Straight up, like, we need to worry about this. Well, it's always some sort of attack. And then we find out that, the CIA and FBI had warned President Bush, and President Bush like, I can go hang out in Camp David for 6 months. And we found out that, I want to say about a year before, and then it came up again, like a few days before 9/11 happened, the Pentagon, oh my gosh, they lost track of like $20 trillion. And, well, I guess the paper trail is gone. No, we don't have to worry about that anymore. And so now we're seeing it again. And now that we saw it come up again, well, then what happens? Oh, war in Russia. We don't have time to worry about the Pentagon. The Pentagon's helping us out. They're our buddies. And so, yeah, it does. I'm not here to say that, that the collapsing of the towers were necessarily a staged event. I am here to say that it worries me that it could be so, though.
Yeah. And I think it's something that we should be allowed to ask questions about without fear of retribution. I mean, for me, just the simple fact that 2 planes crashed in New York and 3 towers went down, that should be enough for us to be saying, hey, something's not adding up quite right here, guys. Or to your point about the Pentagon, how come there was never any pictures of a plane, right? Like, it just a lot of question marks. But anyway, moving on, after Iraq, like when did you return back home stateside, and what did you do after your military deployment?
So, ironically, or maybe not ironically, so again, we were, the first combat support hospital to actually support the war effort. And then I volunteered to spend an extra 3 weeks to clean up all of our gear. So then whoever's going to come in after us will actually have, clean gear, clean temper to build the hospital. And so I went to Qatar, which a lot of people call Qatar, which I don't know. And that's another story. It drives me crazy. Qatar is Qatar. But so I left actually July 4th and landed July 5th. And so 4th of July, that was kind of cool. Hey, freedom. And we're flying home. And so that was kind of neat. And, it got back July 5th. And, the interesting thing about that, though, was, I met a girl and I'd fallen in love. And then we got our orders. Hey, we're going to, Iraq. And, she was certainly worried. I was worried. And while I was over there, I really focused on her and felt like I didn't have a lot of the trauma mess with me. Saw a lot of things I couldn't unsee. But when I got back, it all started just kind of hitting me. And then I realized that I came back as a different person. And that kind of ruined my marriage. Ruined what later became a marriage. And then we probably shouldn't have been married. We kind of promised each other. But yeah, it messed with my head. I didn't really have the wherewithal to delve deep into, hey, what is it I'm experiencing? What is it I'm feeling? And I didn't have a spiritual path at that time to be able to give to a higher power and just be like, hey, here's my grossness. Let me transform this into something better.
Yeah. So did you grow up without religion?
I did.
So how did you consciously go out looking for a spiritual path, or did it find you?
Oh, dude, it totally found me. 100%. Yeah.
And how did that happen?
Well, probably could say it started off with I got really suckered into the narrative of Orange Man Bad, which, again, I'm not here to say that he's good or bad. I am here to say that it's ironic that he's this existential threat, yet he's the first president in modern history that has not, waged a new war. And so there's something to that. But I was working in medical research at the time. And, with medical research, I'm sure you can imagine that, mostly women. And so, what has the media been doing? Well, just like right before I was deploying to Kosovo, well, the media stoking these flames of, oh my gosh, he's in an existential crisis. He's going to grab you, right? And he's going to do this, he's going to do that. And so, all these women immediately are just bemoaning, oh my God, sexual predators just got elected to the office of the presidency. And so, that again just started triggering me, and it started, really bringing up a lot of this trauma. And here I am, a former soldier. Well, maybe I should do something about it. So I got a great idea. I'll just write in on my white knight, and I really threw myself into politics. I became a state delegate. I was a big fan of Bernie Sanders. Because he seemed like he just wanted results for the most part. Nowadays, it seems like he's really playing the game of Republicans are bad and Democrats are good. And that's sad to see, but still he seems to be more focused on results than other people. But so I really threw myself into helping him. And I saw a lot of what seemed to be good that I could do, right? There was a phone bank, for instance, where a friend of mine had asked me to help out. He had about 5 or 6 people show up. I spent 2 days calling people and getting them excited. Now, I don't know if you can tell, I can be kind of an excitable person. And I called, for 2 days. And then that next day, 25 people showed up to make phone calls. And so, I mean, we quintupled it. And then the National Bernie Sanders people showed up, and they, the media showed up. And so, like, okay, so there's something here. The problem that I had was I'd already decided what was good and what was bad. And anytime that we do that, we become dogmatic. And this is something that I couldn't see because I was in the forest and I was already there. And so I couldn't, and so since I was there and I had kind of disillusioned myself of rational thought and was, fully into this dogmatic approach. I'd already decided that, Trump is an existential crisis. Hillary is also an existential crisis, and Bernie's the only way to go. And, Jordan, it seems like, you might be a little confused about that. So let me raise my octave and get a little bit higher and louder in order for it to make sense. And if you're still confused, well, then I'll just yell a little bit louder. Then obviously it'll make more sense. And, that caused a lot of problems for me, but it still showed me, hey, I can do good when I don't have my head up my fourth point of contact. But when I do, I really get in my own way. And what that did eventually is that you can't walk around with your head up your butt too long, or else you're just gonna run into catastrophe after catastrophe. And eventually, it really just kind of ruined my life. And and I really attribute the Tao Te Ching to helping me see the error of my ways, of why exactly. And in fact, there's a really nice little verse that's wrapped up, if you want to hear it, about so there's this idea in the Tao that, when a man is born, he's soft and supple. And when a plant is born, it's soft and pliable. When a man dies, he's stiff and rigid. When a plant dies, it's dry and brittle. Therefore, those who are stiff and inflexible are disciples of death. Doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're good, just means that you're inviting more entropy into your life where the system breaks down, right? When we die, well, we decay. Well, that's what holds us together is no longer holding us together, and we turn back into soil and turn back into the earth. And those who are soft and flexible are disciples of life. Well, I was so rigid because I decided what was going to happen. I decided I need to mold the outer world to fit my inner world. And so I was a disciple of death. And that's why my life fell apart.
Wow. It's interesting. It reminds me of the Rumi quote that's like, at first I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Then I became wise and I changed myself.
Yep.
And I'm curious, you talk about the Tao Te Ching. A, would you talk a little bit about, what that is for listeners who may not be familiar? And B, was that your first real foray into exploring spiritual texts?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, so man, what a great question. So the Tao Te Ching is known as the Book of the Way, right? Came out around 400 BC, written by Lao Tzu. And I really fell in love with the Tao Te Ching by following Alan Watts. And man, do I love some Alan Watts. Yeah. But when I was in the army, so, here I am being dehumanized, I'm being yelled at, I don't like being yelled at, I don't like being told what to do. And the very first person who humanized me invited me to church. I was like, well, hot damn. Okay. All right. Let me go check this out. And then I found more brotherly camaraderie and, familial love than I've ever experienced before in my life. It's like, wow, these guys have something. Have I been an idiot my whole life? And like Christianity really is this beautiful thing. And then it eventually kind of played out to be a little bit more complicated than that, because as loving as they were, I mean, the venom that would drip from their, when they say the homosexuals and like everything, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, right? Because some dude likes the taste of another dude's pee-pee, right? And that's just so strange, so strange. But I probably read the Bible cover to cover about 5 times, and then read the New Testament, I don't know, maybe like 50 times. And so I've got the spirit of it living inside me, though I don't really take the time to memorize, many scriptures. And but Peter Sage. So once my life fell apart because of the politics, well then. As I'm trying to reassemble the pieces, well, then the pandemic happens. It's like, and I'm working in a pediatric hospital, and just like, oh boy. And I was tuning into Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson started secularizing Genesis, and immediately I was like, oh, look at the wisdom here! Like, oh my God! So I've been the idiot that's just discounting this, just like a little kid folding his arms, refusing to eat his vegetables that he's never even tried. No, I don't like it. Whereas Jordan Peterson's like, well, hey, take a look at it this way. Instead of taking it literally, right? We've always been speaking metaphorically. We've always been speaking, in these stories and these axioms and these idioms, and look at it that way. Look at it in a secular way. And I immediately saw the brilliance of it. And he started playing with this idea of create the greatest idea of goodness of which you can conceive, and then make yourself worthy of it by becoming it. And I was like, well, hot damn, that resonates somewhere deep in my soul. And so I started doing that, and I created Gandalf. I've got this 6-minute, video starting off with, well, it's fun too, because here it is about the greatest idea of goodness, which I can conceive, which is Gandalf. And Gandalf is a literary representation of Jesus, right? That's Tolkien actually created him to basically mirror what his idea of Jesus would be in this world. And then I have that sandwich between two physicists, Richard Feynman quote, and then a Niels Bohr quote, afterwards. And, it's really about inviting people to look at things in a different way, rather than, again, just decide that, that they know what's what. And that then led me to tuning into Sadhguru. And I don't know if you're familiar with him, and so Sadhguru. So this Indian mystic, and he just made so much sense. And he brought up this idea that life is about experience. And I listened to his audiobook, Inner Engineering. And, I hope this doesn't make people too uncomfortable. I'm not somebody who's afraid of psychedelics. And so he's, I'm doing this inner engineering. I'm kind of hearing about how you can geometrically connect yourself to the cosmos. It's like, what I'm going to do? I'm going to listen to this guy's advice. He said to go to Devil's Tower. It's a place that I'd really like to go to. He said to go there on a full moon, which, there's one coming up. He said that he's never felt more throat chakra there than or never felt more chakra anywhere in the world than there. And, I'm this guy. I don't really know much about, chakras. I haven't really delved too much into huge, spiritual, namaste and whatnot. But I was like, what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to Devil's Tower and I'm going to trip balls. And so I went there with some gel tabs and some psilocybin capsules. And sure enough, I tripped more balls than I've ever tripped before in my life. I've never really meditated properly, but when I was there, I found a rock that invited me to sit on it. Like, it was like, you should sit here. And I was like, no, I shouldn't. Yeah, I should. And while I was there, I was looking around. And again, I'm playing with this greatest idea of goodness of which I can conceive. And there's these trees all around that have these rags tied to them. And these rags are effectively prayers. And they're prayers for people who have shown up being like, probably, hey, I have a sick parent, I have a sick uncle, I have a sick kid, I've got some tragedy in my life, and I'm going to tie this rag to this tree. And as this rag flaps in the wind, well, it's carrying my prayer up to this mountain, and this mountain of goodness that's then going to, provide an answer to that prayer. And so I see myself surrounded by what could easily be seen as tragedy, but I actually decided to look at it as people coming there and assembling there to see their greatest idea of goodness, which was, again, this mountain of healing. And as I sat there, I could feel my thoughts. And again, eyes closed. I just immediately started crying. I just started because it just felt so amazing. And so I probably looked crazy because I had this Batman scarf on. I had my awesome hat, and I'm sitting there crying, And so, but I felt as my thoughts were crescendoing that I could feel the wind pick up. And as my thoughts were mellowing out, I could feel the wind actually mellow out as well. And that's just how in tune I was to my environment. So I'd say that's probably the deepest religious experience, if you want to call it that I've ever felt.
I'm curious, when would this have been?
This would have been, I think, April of 2001.
You mean 2021?
Or sorry, 2021.
Yeah, that's crazy. And the reason I ask is I was at Devil's Tower with my dad, I think May of 2021. So it's kind of wild synchronicity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So we almost crossed paths.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, that's phenomenal. And so eventually what that did is it led me to Peter Sage. And Peter Sage became my mentor. And Peter Sage is this, elite, a serial entrepreneur. He's trained with Tom Campbell, who was one of the founding scientists of the Monroe Institute, which, bleeding edge of consciousness, even taught the CIA. And, not that I'm a huge fan of the CIA, but, when it comes to flow and Taoism, right? When you look at the Tao to Ching, flow doesn't really doesn't care about morality, because morality only lives in the mind of a human. And so whoever's there to use flow is there to use flow. And so I was like, okay, so this guy's got actual concrete evidence of this stuff. Well, I want to learn from this dude. And so I learned about, neuroscience and how the brain doesn't understand the difference between imagination and reality, which then when I actually started getting to my healing modalities actually served me so immensely, because I grew up, all my life reading fantasy novels and fantasy books that helped me escape the horrors of, child abuse and, even, the horrors of war. And, like this fantasy novel here, which is from R.A. Salvatore. And, he's famous for writing the Drizzt Do'Urden books, but that's the Cleric Quintet. And so I really identify with the main protagonist in that book.
That's cool. And I highly recommend listeners check out the Monroe Institute. It's been really valuable for my own personal journey. I had the benefit of having the executive director, Alan Evans, on the podcast last year. And so that was really great as well. And, as you talk about fantasy, I'm curious to know, what do you think it is that attracts you to fantasy?
So let's go back to this idea that we're souls in heaven looking down saying, hey, this is the life I want to learn. Well, learn from. Well, I choose now to decide that I needed these horrors in my life in order to tune into fantasy to reveal to myself that magic is real.
Yeah. And, you were talking about, to kick things off, about archetypes and how, you're the magician archetype. So could you talk a little bit more about, what is the concept of an archetype, and why do you think that's the one that resonated with you most specifically?
I don't teach this stuff, so I am not necessarily the end all be all. But from what I've learned, right, the archetypes are energies that we all hold within us, right? There's four main ones. Again, there's the sovereign, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And so the magician is the one that, you can imagine you're laying in bed, the alarm goes off, and he starts whispering in your ear about, why you can hit the snooze button, why it's not so important that you make that first meeting, why, and so it just creates and crafts this magical picture of why you don't need to show up. And that's more the immature magician. But the mature magician is, maybe what you even tapped into to start this podcast, of where it could go, of what you could do, of the influence you could have, who you could have on. And again, creating this brilliant idea of what you could actually become. And so that's the mature magician. And, there's the lover. And I think a lot of men will identify with this. especially men who have struggling relationships. So the lover, when mature lover is somebody who can be there to hold space for his partner, and or their partner. And with me though, an immature lover, what I found myself into is that I became the boy. Instead of the man, I became the boy, which then meant that that my partner had to become the warrior. She had to become the mom. She had to be the one telling me what to do and yelling at me. And then that just causes so much strife, because one, she doesn't want to be a warrior, right? She wants to be able to be held. She wants her space to be able to be held. But instead I retreated and I made her actually treat me, like the boy. And whereas again, the mature lover is somebody who can actually be there for their partner and not there to be like, oh, you have a problem, let me fix it. But, oh, you have a problem. Oh, well, let me actually hear you out and let you know that I'm being present and I'm there with you.
Yeah. Wow. It's really, really wild to hear how many similarities you've had in your journey with mine. And I think, I've never heard those 4 main archetypes broken down like that. But I have to say, I mean, the magician is clearly what resonates with me the most. Like growing up, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, like those were everything for me. The King Killer Chronicles, Song of Ice and Fire, right? All these things. And like there's always, but at the same time, right? Like while I loved that side of fiction, I also was very deeply ingrained in the atheistic, materialistic paradigm. If you can't touch it, there's no such thing as magic and fairies and extraterrestrials and all this stuff, right? So I think there was part of me that always yearned to have something more mystical, but didn't believe in it. And then my awakening happened pretty abruptly when I was actually introduced to not only the corruption within the military-industrial complex, but also how that related to the extraterrestrial phenomenon and the cover-up, and that we aren't alone, and that consciousness is very profound, and magic is real, and the ether is real, right? And so shortly after that, I also had a very profound psychedelics experience that kind of bursted me through the veil, and I've been running full speed ever since. And long story short, the point is I think part of the reason why I was excited to start this podcast and to really fully explore this is because I felt like, I always was longing for that sense of the mystical, this sense of there's more to this cosmos than us being here randomly for no reason to, run in a hamster wheel and make as much money and eat, sleep, fucking die, right? And so when I had that validation that all of that is real, not in some fictional reality on a TV screen, but here in our present 3D reality, and then beyond, how could I not be excited, right? How could I not run full steam at that? It's just so exciting and fun, and has just brought so much bliss to my life.
And so again, that comes back to the idea of you're into this rubber band being stretched. And then I do the exact same thing. When I first met Ed Stracher, right, the man who later became my spiritual master and helped me and taught me how to heal. Well, first I had to learn how to heal myself. Because I got no business trying to take somebody else through a process that I can't take myself through, right? Like I liken it to, say, a mountain guide or like a forest guide. If I get lost on the path, I got no business taking somebody else on that path.
Yeah.
And so when I first started going through this, let me take a step back. When I first met Ed, it was actually through Peter Sage. And so again, my mentor is somebody he's somebody at where I want to be. And he's saying, hey, come check this guy out, because Ed's been teaching people how to speed read since the 90s. And in fact, he played some old infomercials that he had. And I remember watching them as a kid. So what's strange is that he's been in my life, even though I didn't realize he was in my life. And it's funny the way that life works that way. And so, Ed's going on about, speed reading. And then he starts going on things that I found incredibly bizarre. It's talking about, things of the spiritual nature, and starts talking about, different things of, demons and witchcraft and curses. Like, bro, what is going on here? Like, what just happened? Like, we were just talking about speed reading, and now he's talking about this. Like, what? And I'm staring at my mentor because he's on this webinar, and he's just got a little smirk on his face, like he's heard it all before. And it's like, okay, well, and then, as I'm listening to this, I'm just lost in my head. Like, man, this is bizarre AF. And so I was like, I got to use the bathroom. I turn off my camera. And as I'm using the bathroom, I hear this clunk, clunk. I'm like, well, that's weird. And I wonder what the hell that was. And so, wash up, come out, and I see my Gandalf statue had fallen off my bookshelf and landed and broke off his left foot, or the same foot, the same ankle that I've historically had a lot of trouble with. And Gandalf, again, is the highest ideal of goodness, which I can conceive. And here's the guy who's going to teach me that magic is real. And what better way than to break my highest ideal of goodness, as if to say that, hey, I can reassemble myself in whatever image I want to become. And so then I was playing with that. And he was talking about maybe following up with him, and gave us the instructions of if we did want to have a one-on-one chat with him, how to do that. And I was thinking, hey, should I follow up with this guy? And in my right ear, I heard Sadhguru whisper. I don't know how I heard him whisper, but I audibly heard him whisper, life is about experience. And again, he would follow up with, isn't it? But he didn't, because it was up to me to say, isn't it? To reaffirm what I already knew. He just whispered in my ear to trigger it. And once I started learning from him, same thing, man. Oh my God, this is real? This is real? And I just threw myself into it.
Yeah. And I can't help but think about the Freemasonic concept of, the left-hand path and the right-hand path. And I'm curious if, maybe there was some relationship to your left foot, being broken, and Gandalf as well, right? To say, you need to follow the right-hand path. You need to be here to heal people, right? You're here for good and for a higher purpose. And I don't know. Do you think there's any credibility to that?
I don't know, man. You just said that, and it's 4:44 right now, and I know. Then I definitely take stock when I see the angel numbers kind of pop up, repeatedly, because they happen a lot. And so I hadn't actually thought about that at all. In fact, I love that you just proposed that question, because I can see that. I can feel some truth in that. I'm going to have to reflect on that a little bit more. But yeah, man, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so what do you think it was about Gandalf in particular that, that was a character that resonated with you so intimately?
He was the one who saw what nobody else could. And it wasn't that he needs to go and fight some Balrog, because in fact, he didn't want to go, into Moria in the first place. It wasn't that he wanted to go confront the Witch King and have his staff explode, because, right, scares the shit out of him. It was the fact that, and what was it that Saruman bemoaned him for? Oh, you spend too much time smoking that halfling, that halfling's leaf, hanging out with these worthless people. But come to find out, these worthless people, yeah, they may not be building castles, they may not be building grand roads, they may not be waging grand wars, but you know what they have? They have a sense of community unlike any other. They got a sense of love that makes them near impervious to the tendrils of evil as they try and wrap around. In fact, Sam was near immune to the power of the ring. And without Sam, Frodo never would have made it. And so Gandalf found the best superpower in the world because he was willing to live there. And, this is before when I tapped into that, this is before I even realized that life is about experience, that I got from Sadhguru. And so when I heard that from Sadhguru, again, it just resonated with me because, again, that love. As a boy, I didn't have that love.
Yeah.
As a boy, I was beat up by those who were supposed to take care of me. Those who were supposed to take care of me were drunken all the time. When you deal with somebody who is a outrageous drunk, well, they only live in extremes. And that's something that a boy can't really handle very well. And so I had to retreat into my inner world. And so seeing that love, that was what I was missing my whole life. Yeah. And so that was my highest ideal because it also is it's what saved the world.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. And it reminds me for sure of one of my favorite elements of Harry Potter, right? Where it's like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something to the extent of, we have something Voldemort doesn't have, right? Something worth fighting for. And I can't help but bring it back to modern day. And my awakening also occurred during COVID. And I think a lot of people's did. And I think not only did it awaken folks to the spiritual reality that transcends this dimension, but also to the very real forces of darkness that are interacting with us in this manifest reality and the cabal. And it seems to me like we are coming to a head of something great. And as the existing powers lose their control, they're almost behaving more and more like animals backed in a corner, and it's forcing folks to almost pick sides. So I don't know. It's just really wild to me to see how much art imitates life, imitates art, right?
Mm. Well, and then so if you think of the Kabbalion, right? The Kabbalion, as above, so below, as below, so above, and that's really, yeah, part of my healing method is to help people understand too that that as above the soul, as below the body, as below the body, as above the soul. And so if the body is not being nourished and the body is consuming, things that are terrible for it, whether it be, glyphosate on the food, whether it just be, trans fats that are, annihilating the microbiome, the preservatives, et cetera, um, then it's going to start creating energy blocks, and those energy blocks are then going to start affecting the soul,
Mm-hmm.
and then the soul itself also. If we don't have some way to give back more than just what we can experience on a physical level, whether that's through prayer, whether that's through meditation, and be able to close our eyes, shut out the world, and make our inner world more real than the outer world, well, then we're constantly be caught in the paradigm and very easily be caught in this world of, well, life happens to me. And if life happens to me, well, there's this idea that be careful of how you speak to yourself, because your body can't help but listen. And so if life happens to me and I'm a victim, well, it's not just my body that's going to listen, but it's also my mind. And my mind and my body are intrinsically, connected. And then I'm going to start creating those neural pathways, because again, the brain doesn't know the difference between, imagination and reality.
Yeah.
So I'm going to create those victimhood neural pathways. I'm going to create those victimhood, neurotransmitters and neuropeptides in order for my, cellular structure inside my body to be like, oh, well, this is who we are as a victim. And if I ever try to change that, well, then if I start changing the neurotransmitters by trying to have a positive mood, well, then the alarm goes off. Ooh, ooh, hey, there's danger. There's something going on here. This is not familiar. What are you doing? Come back to familiar territory.
That's really interesting. So talk to me a little bit more about your present day healing work, and what do you do with clients?
And so, clients, I've worked with clients around the world, and, I do it all remotely, through Zoom, because, energy doesn't need locality. And the method that I created, and because I'm such a nerd for the Tao Te Ching, it really, as I was coming up with, hey, what is my niche? The Ching method just really kind of came to me. And at first, we'll concentrate. Most people only know what they don't want. I just want to be happy means I'm unhappy and I just don't want to be unhappy. Right. Well, okay, what specifically do you want? Right. And if you think of that, say a NASCAR driver, NASCAR driver, if he doesn't want to crash in the wall, guess where he doesn't look? He don't look at the wall. Because he looks at the wall, where we magnify our focus and we actually travel in the direction of our focus. It's just human nature. So he looks at exactly where he wants to go. But most people don't know where they want to go. They know where they don't want to go. And so if you know where you don't want to go, well, the brain doesn't know negation. And the brain doesn't know negation, and you only know where you don't want to go, then the brain's like, oh, this is where you want to go. And so that's what we manifest in our lives. So one, let's get clarity on where it is that you actually want to go, right? What is it that you actually want? Do you want to, why do you want to be healthy? Is it just because, being in pain sucks, right? Is it just because your disease sucks? Is it because, you're being held back? Well, what are you being held back from? What is that great hoorah that you want to get to once you're actually healed? And again, as above, so below, as below, so above. The H is healthy, body, mind, and soul. And, again, whether that's prayer, I don't care like who your higher power is. I really don't. As long as it's adding benefit to yourself and those around you. That's really the only requisite that I'd ask people to have. And a healthy body. Well, what sort of food do you eat? Right? What is it constantly fast food? Right? Where do you live? Do you live at, a home cooked meal? Doesn't have to be the best home cooked meal, but I can guarantee no matter how much butter you put in your food, chances are that meal is going to be far better for you and far more nutritious than if you go to McDonald's. It's because it's not going to have all the preservatives. It's it's not going to have all the waste. Especially if you get down to hot dogs and grinding up tumors and stuff that they might be eating. And then the mind, healthy mind. Well, what are you doing to increase your mind? Right? Are you reading? Because we are programmable by design. right? Again, just coming back to me going to Kosovo, right? When you got attacked by a Muslim, everyone hate Muslims. And we're like, you know what? That's a good idea. Let's all hate Muslims. And then we saw a lot of people getting attacked, a lot of Muslims that had nothing to do with it, right? Thousands of miles away, but since they were Muslim, right? So we're programmable by design. We do not get to choose that at all. What we do get to choose is how we're programmed. So how are we programming ourselves? And, then the I is I am, right? I am is the language of the soul. And, we see this in parables and say Moses. And again, I invite people not to look at, the story of Moses literally, but the idea that when somebody steps in their full I amness, that they can shake an entire nation. And, I am is the language of the soul, but so many people come as I am diabetic. I am arthritic. I am my limiting beliefs. And so they, instead of showing up as I am, they show up as their me. And this is me, right? My body and my avatar, and like you mentioned about, building up karmic debt. Well, because we have this eternal soul that is playing a game, much like a massive multi online, game like say World of Warcraft or something, which, I also have plenty of years of my life that, that I sacrificed to the WoW gods. Not anymore though, thankfully. And the N is non-negotiables. Right? What sort of where are our dogmatic, ideas where we decide that the world already is this way and we don't receive the world and allow ourselves to change, because that will cause us to get in our way, right? Whenever we're dogmatic and we decide that whatever evidence comes to us and we just throw it out, well, it starts to create energy blocks. And the problem with energy blocks is all energy needs to flow. All energy needs to flow, just like water. If water quits flowing, well, guess what? It stagnates. If it stagnates, what's attracted to stagnating water? Parasites, mosquitoes. What do parasites and mosquitoes do? Well, they drain our lifeblood, right? They bring disease. Well, the energy world, again, nobody knows the truth of the capital T. The energy world's no different. And so, what happens when our energy stagnates? Well, then we invite the mosquitoes and parasites of the energy world to feed off of our soul. And if they're draining our soul, well, guess what? Since our me is the subset of our I am, which is the superset, well, if our I am is being drained, with our me will start to break down as a natural consequence. And then the G is goodness, right? Again, it doesn't matter what higher power you believe in, as long as you believe in some form of goodness, adding back to growth and connection, right? Growth and connection. How do I connect to my community, right? Yeah, it's fine to think globally, but act locally and expand. And so how do I help? Right. For me, I first started figuring out how I could help by helping myself. And that was going to the Mormon church, ironically. Right. I had a vision pumped in my head of a podium. And that podium, by seeing that, I knew that I was supposed to be speaking from that podium and sharing my thoughts, even though I'm not a Mormon, even though I don't believe in their dogma, even though I was very open, though not in a rude way, that I didn't believe in their dogma. And I knew I was supposed to speak there, but like, man, I was atheist, maybe, agnostic at best. So how the hell am I supposed to go up there and just, hey, I kind of want to speak to you guys. Like, is it okay if I just come up here? Well, come to find out, because, I showed some, inquisitiveness and started asking people who were brought up in the church. Well, they said, well, hey, you do know that every Sunday, every first Sunday of the month, they have what's called fast and testimonial meeting. And anyone who shows up can go and share their thoughts. Anyone, you say. Well, look at that. So whatever pumped that, that vision to my head, had knowledge of this that I didn't. And so I uncovered it and was like, oh, well, look at that. And so now here I am playing with my highest ideal of goodness. And even though I was at the church and they would say things that I found quite silly, because, one person, then the next person, then the next person, all basically saying some form of the same thing, which is, brothers and sisters, I know in my heart that the Book of Mormon is the one true word of God. And I know in my heart that Joseph Smith is the one true prophet of God. And I know that this is true. And I say it as my personal testimonial. And then the next person happens to have the same personal testimonial. And so does the next person. But instead of judging them, be like, oh, look how silly they are, like I would have, I said, well, you know what? This is probably their highest ideal of goodness, which they can conceive. Well, what's my highest ideal of goodness? And lo and behold, when I created my highest ideal of goodness, it was Gandalf, a wizard, right? Who heals, right? Who has magic. Mm-hmm. And then come to find out, it wasn't long after that I was introduced to Peter Sage, who taught me about consciousness. Max Planck, a contemporary of Einstein, talks about how consciousness is primary, right? Everything is consciousness. Okay, so wait, magic is real. Okay, that's strange. And then I met the guy who could actually teach me how to heal, to show me like, no, dude, let's show you how real magic really is. Mm-hmm. And so when we create our highest ideal of goodness, we actually do have the ability to become it, because we start concentrating on what we want and not what we don't want.
That's beautiful. I heard a great metaphor from a scholar of Mayan wisdom that, magic is technology harnessing energy, right? And, you think about that, like if you showed someone an iPhone several hundred years ago, they'd consider it magic, or a television, right? And so it's just all these, and that's not to take anything away from these forms of energy that we don't yet understand, right? Far from it, but it's more just to say that it's real and it's something that we should be exploring and not shunning as witchcraft, and figuring out, how can we incorporate this to achieve the highest and best goodness of the individual human and of humanity as a whole.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, imagine that you flew a Harrier jet to somewhere in the middle of the Amazon. Maybe some pygmy tribe that's never seen the outer world. Like, what are they going to think?
You talked about how you were pretty involved in politics back in 2016, and it's interesting. I mean, again, similar kind of trajectory as me. I was very much of that dialectic, orange man bad. He's the downfall of American democracy, and then come to realize that while I still certainly have a lot of misgivings about Trump, I've come to recognize that the rot in the system is far deeper than any one individual, right? And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on, do you still consider yourself politically active, and how do you think about the future for our governmental structure going forward?
Oh man, that's such a great question. Holy cow! Politically active, no, not at all. Politically aware, yeah, a little bit. I dabble a bit. The problem with politics and like the news is that the news is fear porn. And, again, we're programmable by design. So if we're watching fear porn, well, guess what we're getting programmed by? And, so then I have to constantly try and clean my energy. Then it gets into my mind. And again, as above, so below, as below, so above. So if I'm poisoning my mind, well, I'm going to start poisoning my body, and I'm going to start poisoning my soul. And so I really watch it. But what I do tune into, though, I'm a huge fan of Jimmy Dore. I don't know if you ever heard of Jimmy Dore. Yeah, I love Jimmy Dore so much. In fact, when he came to Salt Lake, I made sure that I was the first person in the front row. And I was laughing my ass off as loud as I could, because he mentioned during the pandemic how hard it was for him to not be able to go and see crowds, and how much he enjoyed actually hearing people laugh. I was like, this is going to be my gift to you, Jimmy Dore. And boy, I can laugh, really freaking loud too. I got a pair of lungs. I do tune into breaking points now and then. I really like Sagar. Sagar and Jetty. I love the way that his mind works. Crystal Ball, I like her, though not as much. I did watch the interview they had with RFK, which I could see RFK. If anyone were to get me even remotely political active, it would be RFK for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I definitely find myself struggling with exactly what you're talking about, right? Where I want to be politically aware, I want to be politically active. Especially as I mentioned earlier, and maybe it's just, my perspective has changed because I've been awakened to what's really going on, but it really does seem to me that we're nearing the end game, right? And you look at, the World Economic Forum, they accelerated their 2030 goals because, for unforeseen circumstances, I think is how they framed it. I think in reality, it's because people are waking up much faster than they ever expected. But anyway, nonetheless, it's something I certainly struggle with because it's toxic, right? It's poisonous. And it's like, I want to know what's going on and I want to do what I can to help, but also I need to turn it the fuck off and just be at peace. Right. So it's difficult waters for me to navigate. And I wish I had a better solution at this point in time.
Well, and so for me, coming back to Jimmy, Jimmy's evolved a lot. And so before he was just so angry. I mean, just so angry. And that really fed, who I was as a person. I was very angry at the system and, very much against the system. But now that he's got, Kurt Metzger on there and doing a lot of commentary, I mean, it's just so many jokes. And so I hear something horrible and then Kurt just makes this funny joke and I laugh. I was like, okay, I'm getting permission to laugh at this horrible stuff. So I don't need to buy into the narrative that I need to be afraid. And so it's something I'm quite thankful for, that I can still, and I don't watch a ton of it. I might watch, maybe a video a day, if that. But I do like, if I'm going to get my news, so to speak, it's most likely to be him because he's got a good beat on my pulse as well. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to have some sense of, say moral outrage, though I try not to moralize much.
Mhm.
I feel like he's got a good reason for like, hey, if you're going to be outraged about something, this is probably a good reason to be outraged. Rather than be like, well, didn't you know that Trump was mean to Jim Acosta? Oh my gosh, dearie, right?
That's funny. And so living in Salt Lake, is that right? Is that the part of Utah you're in? Do you find that generally open to the realm of the spiritual and the metaphysical, or is it more? Are folks in Salt Lake maybe a little bit more? I don't want to necessarily say constrained, but are they just more centered in a Mormon culture and maybe not necessarily as open to some of the things you're talking about here?
That's another great question. So, I'd say about half of Utah is LDS, but of those half that are LDS, I would say a minimum of half really struggle with their faith. Because here's the problem: it's just like I said before, that you'll see the same person over and over and over again stand up and say, hey, brothers and sisters, I know this, I know that. The problem is as soon as they step down, right? So here's somebody, saying, hey, Jordan, don't you know that I know in my heart that I've got the right book, I've got the right prophet, I've got the right wisdom. And the second they sit down, the big old, scowl goes back on their face. It's like, that guy's full of shit. And, pandemic's happening and I'm trying to discover like, hey, who the hell am I? Right. And I'm trying to figure that out. And I'm trying to follow this vision that was pumped in my head. And then I think it was October or November of 2021. And, the LDS church here put on a class that they'd never done before, which was, about, having, emotional, wherewithal. I can't remember exactly how they put it, but helping people become more emotionally resilient. And, they were there and they had a book. And, they had an administrator and the administrator go through the book and would not deviate from the book at all, which is where I came in. And so, I'm there and I'm sharing real love with these people and I'm really just pulling out their personal testimonials. I got them all, every single one. There's a group of like 10 people, every single one of them. I got them to admit that they hate it. They hate it when somebody goes up there and says exactly that. I know, brothers and sisters, I know that Book of Mormon is a wonder, because they're like, dude, you're full of shit. And because that's no different than, again, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, you're wrong. You should do this. You should be me. You should be me. You should be me. Well, you're not happy. The second you sat down, you got a scowl on your face. You're not happy. Why should I be you? And so I got them to actually admit, their humanity outside of their dogma. And so I kind of started flipping, a little bit. Yeah, I didn't do so well because I didn't keep going, and we didn't have that intimate. I went through the entire time. It was like 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and so I didn't have a whole lot of time with them. But I started flipping dogma around a little bit, and I don't know if you know, but dogma backwards is "am God."
Wow. That's really cool. And, it's interesting too. And I think it ties back to what we were talking about, even, with the military in Iraq, right? And it's like, you can see through those hollow words when people, like George Bush is saying, we're Christians, we're coming into Iraq as part of a, almost like a holy war, another crusade. Yet, we're launching drones and mowing down civilians left and right. Like your actions are not matching up with the spiritual foundational principles that you're hoping to articulate.
Again, we're programmable by design. And if the people who are at the top of the top, right, World Economic Forum, I bet maybe 1% of the population knows who Klaus Schwab is, right? I bet most people have no idea who he is. Well, under Klaus Schwab are going to be world governments. Under world governments are going to be our local municipalities. But people look at, people like, AOC or Bernie Sanders, like, oh, that's somebody with real power. Not at all. Whoever's in the shadows behind them, right? That's who has the real power. And they're the ones who have the real core beliefs. And you can kind of look at it as during the Manhattan Project, there were about 144,000 people working on the Manhattan Project, and none of them knew they were working on the Manhattan Project. Why? Their base wasn't big enough, right? They just couldn't see. And, maybe an analogy, kind of to go along with, what you were talking about, is, imagine a slug and a slug's living its life. It's crawling around, leaving little slimy trails, munching on lettuce. And then an ant walks by and this ant looks at this slug like, a slug, look at you, just leaving slimy trails, just munching on lettuce. An ant, that's where it's at. And you know what? I live in a colony. I've got an exact job to do. I'm part of a community. An ant, man. I'll only choose being an ant. Well, then, the ant, walks over this big thing that comes to be the toe of a hen. This hen looks at this ant and is like, an ant. Look at him, just following, chemicals and pheromones telling him what to do. Following a queen that he's never even met. Just obeying orders like, oh, a hen. I have food that just rains from the sky. I can just walk around and peck wherever I want. Like a hen, that's where it's at. And because the base isn't big enough, and you get further up, then the base gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then at the very top, you realize that, oh, well, there's actually somebody pulling the strings, and they are the ones with the biggest base. And, unfortunately to say, I think that whoever's got the biggest base is likely some sort of cabal like Hydra structure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the fundamental truth that, is coming out. Right. And, what gives me great hope, right, is, that Hydra structure, it's always been there, right? At least for seemingly thousands of years, right? I think what's different is that we're finally to the point where we're, knock on wood, breaking free of it, right? We've got the technology to communicate, to let the truth rise to the top, and to recognize that, we have the power, right? These goons like Klaus Schwab and George Soros, they only have the power that we give to them, right? And so when we say, fuck you, we're done with this, we're ready for something better, we're ready to be responsible stewards of this beautiful planet that we've been given with, we're ready to be members of our galactic community in a positive manner, right? Then, the limits are infinite.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I really like that a lot. And, so, like you're saying, there's so many people that are waking up. And so because of the stage that we're at, right, they can't just go out and start murdering people like they may have, say, 200-300 years ago. And so the only thing they can do is like, there's a clear signal that's waking people up. So what they do is they just have a cascade of noise to try to cover up the signal. And that's effectively what they're doing.
Yeah. And that's, and I can't remember where I heard this recently, but it was like, once, like, as truth gets louder, it gets stronger, right? And as fear and force, it gets smaller, right? And so the more we shine a light on these folks behind the curtains, right, the more they retrench, and the more they say, crazy things like, you have no right not to get vaccinated, and, we're going to censor you for misinformation, and, we're sending billions and billions to Ukraine because Putin bad. Meanwhile, the homeless population in America continues to grow. You know what I mean? Like that, just the clear dichotomy and just, frankly, bullshit, for lack of a better word, just shines through that much clearer.
I'm glad you brought that up, but I think the one thing that you forgot to mention that actually is a really good reason to go to war with Russia is the fact that Trump's face smells like a Russian, hooker pee. Right? And so I think that's a legitimate reason to go against a superpower. Is like, bro, this guy's getting his face pissed on by a Russian hooker. Like, whoa, we can't be having any of that. And you're right, and that's what's so brilliant about it is that you see people coming off and just like screeching like a screeching harpy. Look at him. And what's so crazy is that if we go back to politics a little bit, it's insane for me now to step back and be like, oh, as much as I fell into the paradigm of Orange Man bad, what's even more fascinating is the fact that Hillary was so unpalatable and was so gross that a carnival barker won over her in a historic event. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And, I'm ashamed that I was fooled by thinking that she was, not a horrible person, frankly. And it just gets back to just how deep the rot is within the system of like, those were our options, right? But again, it's all part of the awakening process and all part of that elevation of consciousness to just recognize, what's always been there beneath the surface and that shadow side. And now, it doesn't mean that we have to hate it or despise it or, we need to come back with fire and brimstone, but it's, we need to expose it. We need to let the truth shine through. We need to stop all of the suffering that's been caused by these maniacs in power and transcend it to something much better and much more beautiful.
I love that. And in fact, I think the first thing we can do is to examine the places in our lives where we might say, hey, I feel ashamed. Mm-hmm. Because does a sapling feel ashamed that it's not big enough to reach, the sky, like the trees around it. No, it's, does a walnut, or rather an acorn, does an acorn judge itself for not being a full oak? Well, no, because we're all at our level of awareness, right? Our base is only so big. So, if we do find a place where we feel shame, right? Shame is only going to hurt us. It's only going to hold us back. It's only going to create blocks. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just means it's going to create blocks and going to invite entropy. It's going to, as it creates blocks and it stagnates, it's going to invite those parasites. And so if we do find shame, well, we can examine those and be like, oh, well, this does not serve me. I should release any energy that does not serve me. And so that way I can grow into the magnificent tree, a magnificent being that I'm meant to be. And because the idea, there's been no truer statement, which you really brought up, with Rumi, that you change yourself and you change the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so do you have any good like daily practices that you use to release energy that's not serving you?
Oh yeah. So every morning I wake up at 4:45 a.m. I come downstairs. I drink my big old liter bottle of water. But more than that, so this is a Flaska, Flaska, and it's created to higher vibrations. It's also got love and gratitude written on it. There's studies that have been shown that if you send love to water, will actually create more harmonic geometric shapes, and water responds. Water's got memory. I've also written stuff on the glass as well, and so I do that. Then I go upstairs and I meditate for a good 40 minutes, and I might use binaural beats, right? I might get myself in a specific, alpha state, or, I might use a theta state if I want to be a little bit more calm, and, or I might just use nothing and just sit in silence. But I meditate every morning, without fail. My, Ed Stracher, my spiritual master, has taught me how I can transform, right, these energy blocks and transform these negative energies into, love, light, prosperity, and abundance. And then after that, so 5:30 comes around, so my alarm goes off. Hey, meditation's over. Then I hop in my car and I go to the gym. But as I'm driving to the gym, I have an oath of manifestation that I say every morning. And with that, and so it's maybe 2-3 minutes long, if that. And so I just I've got it on my phone, so I just speak along with it as I'm driving, really get myself into that feeling. And then when I go to the gym, I mainly spend my time in the steam room. And then after the steam room, I go to the pool and I work out in the pool, and do a little bit of workout in the steam room as well. But the steam room is a great way to get a free cardio workout. I'm a big nerd for Joe Rogan, and I've probably watched every episode that Rhonda Patrick has been on, and she talks about the deep benefits of saunas and heat and heat shock proteins, how it makes our our immune system so much stronger. And so I do meditation in the steam room as well. And so then now I'm really feeling this morning meditation, and so it's effectively a way of me to set my GPS right in the morning. Right, because I can rush and scramble and just try to hop in my car to try to get to somewhere where I have an approximate idea of where I'm going. And then I get downtown, and downtown is like a bustle. And like, holy crap, like, how do I get there? And then I'm driving around. I might actually find that I'm late. But if I spend a couple of minutes first by setting the GPS, setting my coordinates, well, I'm going to get taken right to where I need to go. And if I want a life of love and abundance, and I don't want to be swayed by things that make me that are trying to make me afraid, or trying to control my mind, or trying to control the how I act in the world, well, then I better make sure that I am the king of my own domain.
Wow. That's awesome, Joshua. Man, this has been such a fun conversation. Where can folks learn more about you if they want to just learn more about what you're doing with the Ching method and see about booking an appointment with you?
Yeah, man, I appreciate the question. So yeah, if there's people out there who are struggling, right, I mainly focus in chronic pain. And that can be PTSD, depression, but also, muscular skeletal pain. And, and if there's one thing I've learned with 10 years in the medical field, that our medical system is wholly incompetent at dealing with chronic conditions. Acute conditions, I break my arm, I get shot, I get stabbed. Wonderful. You need to go to the ER, go to the ER. Right. But when it comes to chronic conditions, we're wholly incompetent because we just treat it like, oh, you're missing a pill. And so if you're looking to try something that can actually affect the root cause, and actually help, again, reach that superset. So then everything downstream into the subset can heal. You can reach me at www.freemefrompains.com, and you can book a healing plan right there. And so that way, if nothing else, we can build some clarity around what's in your way, build a healing plan. And hey, maybe you feel it's not right to work with me. Hey, that's fine. At least you can have some benefit to figure out, because there's this idea that hurt people hurt people. Well, if hurt people hurt people, and I reduce the amount of hurt, and I actually take somebody who from hurting to healed, well, what are healed people going to do?
Awesome. Well, Joshua, thank you again for coming on the show. Thank you for helping to heal people and bringing a lot of conscious awareness to a higher level. We really appreciate everything you're doing.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate the opportunity. I love how much our lives have overlapped and how similar we are. Right, it's fun, and it's fun to be a part of this awakening and to help herald others, because ultimately, what a better life it would be to have more people feeling joy and abundance. And to feel like we can actually affect the world in a positive way. And what better and more empowering way to realize, like, oh, if everything's consciousness, well, what if I focus there first? And then I overlay that consciousness, that healed consciousness, onto the substrate.
Yep. And it gets back to what you were talking about, with that acorn growing into an oak, right? If we lose sight of that seed, that source that is the foundation of everything in the universe, including us as an individual human, then we're always wandering in darkness, and in darkness you can only find more darkness.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and then with darkness, right? Darkness is just the absence of light. So when you show up with light, you don't force it. The darkness just recedes from the light.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, hey, this has been a blast. We'll definitely have to do it again sometime, and keep doing what you're doing, bringing light to.
Oh, thanks, man. Hey, you too. You're doing God's work, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And may love and truth always guide your path.
Fantastic, man. Well, have a great evening.
Oh, thanks, man.
Cheers. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. In this conversation, Joshua and I discussed the archetypes of the mature masculine. Joshua visited Denver last weekend, and he shared with me the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. The authors highlight the four archetypal masculine energies identified by pioneer of depth psychology Carl Jung: King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. The characters we keep encountering on this hero's journey. Writing in 1990, Moore and Gillette had already recognized a disastrous mistake made by American society: attacking men and masculine energy as inherently toxic, rather than helping men to self-actualize the divinity of the mature masculine. They further make the case that we have never been living in a patriarchy, as the gender activists claim. Rather, our society has been structured as puerarchy, where immature boy energy dominates. Rather than helping men mature into their greatest ideas of goodness, women instead have been forced to take on roles they don't want and to which they are less naturally inclined, while also not receiving the tools necessary to mature into their greatest idea of femininity. The authors highlight the world is overpopulated not just by immature men, but also tyrannical and abusive little girls pretending to be women. In the resulting pandemonium of immature boy and girl psychology, we have perverted the essence of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Moore and Gillette recognized the enemy for both sexes is not the other sex, but infantile grandiosity and the splitting of self that results from it. This battle of the sexes only serves to destroy the nuclear family, to turn men and women against one another, and to strengthen the power of the establishment. Gender roles in a mixed-up world. This age of Aquarius has kicked off with traditional gender roles and gender itself being challenged in confusing, fast-moving ways. Unfortunately, this has not always been for the better. Modern society has seen a gradual simplification, as if coordinated and pre-planned, of the American man, where our drinking water is toxified by atrazine, and men are conditioned to fear getting their girlfriends the wrong flavored latte. Meanwhile, the spineless puppet in the Oval Office has allowed over 6.3 million immigrants over the border illegally since his inauguration, many of them military-age men. That's not to say the vast majority of these immigrants didn't come here in search of a better life for themselves and their families, and that they will be productive members of a brighter American future. But we'd be naive to think that powerful elements of organized crime haven't also been taking advantage of this porous border, or that tens to hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors have been smuggled into the country. Many of these children are destined for the pits of hell, the dark networks of human trafficking. In 2023, we live in a society that is afraid to ask tough questions and to slow down for introspection, where we have been socially engineered to accept that chemically castrating and mutilating the genitalia of confused, depressed children somehow protects them. And that's not to throw shade on those children considering transitioning gender. Quite the contrary. My point to those children is twofold, one of caution and one of consideration. The point of caution. There are predatory individuals and organizations that have been involved in the transgender movement from day one. This includes John Money, Alfred Kinsey, and the Tavistock Institute. This is a brand new cultural phenomenon growing incredibly fast and demonstrating all of the signs of social contagion. Be careful and do your due diligence. The point of consideration. Before you make any life-changing alterations to your body, first go inward. Consider developing a meditation practice for 6 months before making any major decisions. Perhaps there are simpler ways to find answers to the questions you've been asking. Investigative journalist Matt Walsh recently pushed Americans to ask themselves, what is a woman? To consider that perhaps bad actors have weaponized human compassion and committed the greatest crime of toxic purarchy, the appropriation of womanhood itself. That perhaps we have started a process that is systematically eliminating safe spaces for girls and women and destroying the dreams of female athletes. On Substack, I've included a post from Dr. Anastasia Lupus showing an explosion in the number of pediatric gender clinics between 2007 and 2022, growth of 15,000%. Terms like pediatric gender clinic and gender-affirming care are evil masquerading as goodness, a trick as old as time. As Voltaire realized long ago, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. What is a man? Just as important as asking what is a woman, it's time we ask, what is a man? As I consider the Jungian archetypes of king, warrior, magician, lover, here are some ideas of what the greatest version of masculinity looks like to me. The king. King energy is father energy. King energy is primal in all men. The king is master of his domain. He is wise, selfless, and complex. The king is the calm in the storm, the structure in the chaos, the opportunity in the crisis. The king is strategic, the king is prepared, the king is patient, and the king sees around corners. The king is not a tyrant nor an impotent weakling. He is not envious because he is secure in his own self-worth. The king does not subjugate or dominate his subjects. He inspires the creative potential of his community. The king recognizes the Tao, the natural law structuring and ordering all of existence. The king in his fullness possesses the qualities of order, of rational patterning, of integration, and of integrity. The king reminds us to experience astonishment, that we are here on earth for a higher purpose, and that the creative intelligence of a harmonious human population is infinite. The warrior. The warrior is strong. He is strong physically, strong emotionally, strong mentally, and strong spiritually. The warrior is disciplined, the warrior is determined, the warrior is tenacious, the warrior is organized, and the warrior perseveres. The warrior is situationally aware, physically fit, and ready for combat. He has learned compassion from the lover, but he is not afraid to stand up to predators. He is self-confident, self-controlled, and humble. The warrior understands clarity of thought and practices discernment. He is prepared to handle violence if it erupts, but he does not instigate it. And he recognizes that nonviolent non-cooperation and speaking truth almost always works more effectively. The warrior is alert, adaptable, open-minded, and steadfastly principled. The strong warrior is incredibly dangerous, voluntarily constrained. The weak warrior is just incredibly dangerous. The warrior would rather stand alone with his principles than together with a crowd of maniacs. The magician. The magician recognizes that faith is belief in the reality of things unseen, that there is much more to this life and to this reality than meets the eye. The magician sees that universal wisdom is the path to conscious evolution, and he has learned how to experience God directly. The magician has worn many costumes throughout the ages. The magician appears as the physician, the quantum physicist, the innovator of free energy, the holy man, the mystic, and the shaman. The magician understands that there are charlatans, snake oil salesmen, and greedy men behind the curtain. The magician is the man's bullshit detector, and he calls out evil when he sees it. The magician does not become a manipulator himself, nor someone who sabotages the courageous output of men braver than he. The magician is the knower and master of technology, both theoretical and applied. He remembers the initiatory ritual processes of the mystery schools, and he alerts society to their relevance today. The magician explores spiritual alchemy and recognizes the divinity of source consciousness, uniting us all. The lover. As the king, warrior, and magician integrate the man with his inner ideals, the lover connects him to external reality, to the sensuality of experience, to the energy flowing through our ineffable cosmos. The lover recognizes not the bondage of being human, but the blessing of it. The lover approaches his mate not as a parasite approaches its host, nor as a coward approaches a bully, not to dominate her or to supplicate to her. Rather, he recognizes he and she are individually and interdependently spirits of love and freedom, responsible for catalyzing one another's latent human potential. The lover pursues not the depraved ecstasy of wanton hedonism, but the bliss of being and the depth of spiritual fulfillment. The lover loves his partner, his family, his friends, his community, his country, his planet, and his universe. The lover is alive and passionate, energized and romantic. The lover makes the times as much as the times make the lover. He is prepared for anything thrown his way at this place, at this time, on this planet Earth, because he's also got the king, the warrior, and the magician by his side. It's time our society changed the narrative on gender and sex. We need to stop fearing toxic masculinity and instead to develop masculine excellence. What are the best aspects of being a man, and how can we as individual boys and men actualize those greatest ideas of goodness? It feels like America today is ready to find out. Because the forces of empire fear nothing more than a strong, free-thinking man who believes in God.